Have you ever known what to do to calm yourself, but found that when anxiety hits, those tools seem to disappear? Have you noticed that just thinking about certain situations can make your body react, even when you're completely safe? Welcome back to Quieting Anxiety, a podcast by Excel at Life. I'm Dr. Monica Frank, and today we'll explore my favorite tool in the exposure therapy toolkit, Imaginal coping exposure. This technique can help you practice how to face a fear before you're ready to do it in real life. By walking through the scenario in your mind and including the coping strategies you would use if it were actually happening. Let's begin by settling into this moment. Take a slow, deep breath in and let it out gently. With each exhale, allow your shoulders to relax just a little more. With each breath, recognize how far you've come. You have learned so much about your anxiety. Breathe deeply and let that settle in. Let quiet confidence settle into your body. Feel your strength, not in doing the hardest thing, but in being willing to try. Take one more breath in, and as you exhale, bring that feeling with you into today's episode. Imaginal exposures can be especially useful when you experience anxiety just imagining a feared situation, or when you're not ready for real-world, in vivo exposure, or you want to mentally rehearse coping tools in the context of a feared situation. And as I've explained in previous episodes, as an exposure technique, it should only be attempted with the aid of a therapist experienced with these methods. You might be thinking, but I imagine the anxious situation all the time. That's what makes me anxious. How can imagining it more possibly help? That's a great question, and it points to a key difference between unintentional worry and intentional imaginal exposure. When anxiety pulls you into a spiral of what-ifs or worst-case scenarios, it tends to feel chaotic, overwhelming, and out of your control. You're reacting to fear. But imaginal coping exposure is different. It's structured, deliberate, and includes the tools you would use in real life. Instead of just replaying the fear, you're guiding your mind through it with calming strategies, realistic thinking, and emotional regulation. Over time, this teaches your brain that the situation, even though imagined, is not dangerous. You're no longer feeding the anxiety cycle with helplessness, you're transforming it. Now, of course, for some people, this kind of mental rehearsal might not produce strong anxiety. That's okay. Even without a high anxiety response, imaginal coping exposure can help build readiness, increase your sense of control, and reinforce coping skills. So when the time comes to face the real situation, you're already prepared. Let me give you an example from my practice. I once worked with a young boy who had panic attacks related to fear of heights and fear of crowds. He really wanted to climb a lookout tower like his younger brother could. The tower had several flights of stairs separated by open metal platforms with a railing. We began by having him imagine walking up to the first platform. He described the stairs, the railing, and how he expected to feel. Then he imagined himself sitting down on the steps and using his coping tools, deep breathing, calming thoughts, and grounding. That was his imaginal coping exposure, a detailed mental practice, including how he would manage the fear. I wrote down his description and told him to record it at home. Once he could listen to that recorded script without increased anxiety, his parents took him to the tower. He followed the same steps: climb one flight, sit, breathe, and calm himself. That became an in vivo coping exposure, which we'll cover in an upcoming episode. After doing this process a few times, one day he came in and proudly told me, "I went all the way to the top." And not only that, but his anxiety related to his fear of crowds reduced significantly without us even working on it. That's the power of mental rehearsal combined with coping. Imaginal coping exposure helps you mentally rehearse feared scenarios in a safe setting and practice your coping strategies while imagining the fear so your brain learns to use them in the same moments anxiety might occur in real life. It helps build cognitive flexibility so you can access these tools when anxiety spikes and reduce the fear response gradually even before you face the real life trigger. And just as importantly, each step of this process is an exposure in itself. Even writing down the feared situation can stir up anxiety, which gives you the chance to practice managing it. For some forms of anxiety, the feared experience isn't something you can easily recreate in the outside world. The anxiety is more internal, centered on thoughts, images, memories, or anticipated reactions, rather than a specific external situation. This is often true in conditions like OCD, health anxiety, trauma-related anxiety, and panic disorder, where the fear may be about what might happen in your mind or body rather than what's happening around you. In those cases, imaginal exposure may be the most direct and sometimes the only way to work with the fear. By intentionally bringing the feared thoughts or scenarios into awareness, you're no longer avoiding them or pushing them away. Instead, you're allowing your brain to learn that these internal experiences, while uncomfortable, are tolerable and not dangerous. Without imaginal exposure, these fears can remain untouched because there's no real-world situation that fully captures what the anxiety is actually about. This method involves writing and revising a personal script that guides you through the fear with coping strategies built in. But before writing an exposure script, be sure you have created a hierarchy of feared situations. This imaginal coping exposure technique applies the same gradual desensitization method we explored in the last episode. You're still working with a hierarchy, starting with a scenario that's manageable, often one that provokes mild to moderate anxiety, rather than jumping straight into your most feared situation. By assigning an anxiety rating to the imagined exposure, using your 0 to 10 scale, you can gauge where it falls on your hierarchy and choose appropriate starting points. As you mentally rehearse each scenario, incorporating coping tools along the way, you're teaching your brain to stay with the discomfort instead of avoiding it. Over time, as you listen to or reread your script and your anxiety level decreases, you're building tolerance step by step, just like in any other desensitization process. This structured, repeated practice not only reduces your reactivity, but also strengthens your ability to move up the hierarchy with confidence. Once you have your hierarchy, you choose the situation you want to focus on. The first step is to write out in detail the scenario that causes fear. Where are you? What are you doing? What thoughts are you having? Include anything that might trigger your anxiety. For example, I walk into the grocery store. I'm already nervous that I might have a panic attack. I notice how bright the lights are and how many people are in the aisle. I start to feel trapped. This example is very brief. Typically, when clients write a script, it will be short, but I ask them to provide more detail. It needs to feel real. If you are doing it right, it is likely to feel uncomfortable. Remember, writing the script is an exposure, so be sure to pause when needed You can use your calming skills as you write out the scenario. Step 2 is to add the anxiety response. Rewrite the script and include the anxiety symptoms you expect. What do you feel in your body? What level would you rate the anxiety on a scale from 0 to 10? When do you expect your anxiety to increase? For example, my heart starts pounding, I feel shaky, my anxiety jumps to a 7, I start thinking, what if I faint? The anxiety response may escalate throughout the script. For instance, initially you might feel tension, and then later you feel your heart pounding. Finally, step 3 is to add your coping tools. This is where the exposure becomes a coping exposure. Add your calming strategies, your deep breathing, self-talk, grounding techniques, and reminders of your plan. For instance, I tell myself, this is just anxiety. I've handled it before. I slow my breathing and focus on one shelf in front of me. I remind myself it's okay to feel this. I don't have to run. It is best to insert these coping statements throughout the script, not just at the end. By the time you finish the script, you should have several pages written. If not, try to expand it with more detail for all 3 steps. Once your script is complete, your exposure is to review it repeatedly. You can read it silently, read it out loud, or record it and listen to it daily. For my clients, I usually had them record the script because it tends to immerse them more in the situation. In addition, I believe it makes the coping method stronger because they are hearing themselves reassure and coach themselves. Also, I encourage clients to handwrite their script rather than typing because it increases engagement and makes avoidance harder, which makes for a better exposure. The goal is to reduce the anxiety that arises with each review. When you imagine the situation and feel confident in your coping, you're strengthening the brain's ability to respond flexibly, not reactively. You might wonder, why does this method work? I often hear, I know how to calm myself, but when anxiety hits, I forget what to do. That is the crux of this method. Imaginal coping exposures train your brain to use coping tools under stress. It's like mental rehearsal for an athlete. You're building muscle memory, not for your body, but for your emotional response. You increase familiarity with the feared experience, and you reinforce your ability to stay rather than escape. Imaginal coping exposure may not create the same intensity of anxiety as real life exposure, but it creates a bridge. It prepares your mind and body to face anxiety with confidence and tools in hand. Even if the fear isn't overwhelming in imagination, this practice helps to build your skill set, increase your self-efficacy, and reduce the fear of fear itself. For some people, imaginal exposure, especially imaginal coping exposure, can significantly reduce anxiety before they ever face the situation in real life. By repeatedly imagining the feared scenario and practicing how to cope with it, the brain begins to reinterpret the threat as more manageable. When that happens, items on your hierarchy may no longer trigger the level of anxiety you initially predicted. A situation that once felt like a 7 or 8 may now feel like a 4 or 5. That's not a sign that the hierarchy was wrong. It's a sign that learning has occurred. When you notice this shift, it's important to revisit your hierarchy, re-rate the anxiety levels, and reorder the steps if needed. Gradual desensitization is a flexible process, not a rigid one, and your plan should change as your anxiety changes. Adjusting your hierarchy ensures that you continue to challenge yourself appropriately, neither pushing too hard nor holding yourself back unnecessarily. Over time, you may be ready to shift from imaginal to actual exposure. But even if you're not there yet, every time you practice, you're moving forward. For this episode, reflect on how this method might help you face situations that cause anxiety. Also, this is a good time to review the episodes that are relevant to this one, such as creating a hierarchy, creating a personal anxiety rating scale, and especially episode 37, which is an introduction to exposure techniques. It is best to have therapeutic help in writing the script. Sometimes people are surprised by how much anxiety they experience in the process of writing. Other people may not be immersing themselves enough in the method to experience anxiety, and so need expert assistance to fully focus on writing a script. Let's end with a moment to acknowledge your courage. Take a slow breath in and exhale gently. You've just explored a new way to face your fear with intention and with tools. You've taken another step in training your brain not to run from discomfort, but to work with it. Remind yourself, I can face this in my mind, and I can face it in real life. I know how to calm myself. I'm not avoiding, I'm preparing. Feel that quiet confidence grow. No pressure, no perfection, just progress. Take one more breath and carry that strength into the rest of your day, knowing you don't have to get it perfect, you don't have to feel fearless, you just need to keep practicing gently, intentionally, bringing your tools into the places your fear used to take over. And every time you do, you're sending a healing message to your brain. This is hard, but I can handle it. I'm building strength, one imagined moment, one real breath, one small step at a time. Until next time, keep practicing, keep breathing, and keep moving forward.